Welcome everybody, I'm Killzone, and this crossover is a huge deal. This is the third crossover of the Kessler Saga. When it came to this crossover, what I wanted to focus on was three particular people, right? Now, of course, have some, character development for other characters as well, but the three people that were always going to be my focus was always going to be Techy, Matt, and Ted. Now, it's been building up for some time, the threat of Techy, what he poses to the Ultimates. So that's always been a lingering thought in the background. What is Techy's end goal? What is his, main thing he's trying to achieve and stuff like that? But then, there is the story of Ted and Matt. Ted has been revealed in the episodes prior to this crossover as he's basically responsible for killing Matt's father. And then there's also Matt, trying to learn to be a competent fighter. Because ever since the very first crossover, there's been a underlining push to kind of show Matt's bravery over time. Because Matt has basically been what amounts to the series coward, for lack of a better term. He has been always jittery, always scared, always terrified. That's just his character. But over time, he's slowly become more and more confident. A good example of this is the first crossover where, yes, he was under mind control. In the first crossover, even though he was still being mind controlled, he still, fought and held his own against early day kill. And he did, he held his own. But it's been a constant push to kind of see, where Matt's character stands. Because, for all intents and purposes, usually he is the weakest of the team. But, there's this push, because even though he hasn't been the strongest of the team, because obviously that would be kill. Even though he hasn't been the strongest of the team, there's been a push to show him in a better light. Prime example of this is the tournament. The tournament, he held his own against Cerebrum and Saran, some of the deadliest opponents they've ever had to face, and he held his own and wasn't scared. That's just something that's been developing over time, and it's been a really big deal. But where Matt lacks in terms of bronze, he's also really compassionate, he's really caring, he understands people. So for instance, even though Matt isn't the strongest character by any means, he's still a character that gets to the other strong characters. It's shown over the course of these episodes that while, like Commander even agrees, look, you're not the strongest on the team, I can see that. But at the end of the day, the team needs you. They need you because at the end of the day, you keep them grounded. You keep them here. You show them what they're fighting for. And that's kind of Matt's character, and what it shows in this crossover is he understands people. He talks to them. A good example is he got the Executioner to be on their team. Executioner was always about not being on anyone's team. He always wanted to be by himself. But Matt got to him. He's like, hey, there is a better way. And eventually, he became a valued member of the team. And that's because of Matt. There's been times where he's been able to talk villains down and show them there is a better way. He even did that somewhat with Techy in this crossover. Arguably one of the biggest threats that the Ultimates has ever faced, and Matt was able to talk him down. And that's why Matt's death at the end of this crossover is kind of bittersweet. Because Matt has, he even says to Commando in one of these earlier episodes prior to the crossover event, he even tells Commando, I don't feel like... He basically says, I basically don't feel special. I don't feel like I bring anything of worth to this team. I'm worthless, I'm useless. There's no point in me telling them what's wrong with me when they are more important. But even though Matt has all these self-doubts, and these self-doubts are not brand new. If you watch this series long enough, you have noticed that, Matt kind of gets the short end of the stick on jokes and in terms of fights as well. So of course Matt would be feeling this way. And Commando tells him hey, you're as special and as big of a part of this team as anyone else. And he proves it in this crossover because he does something that no other character has ever been able to do. He fought Avalanche and Puppet Master by himself, one-on-one, and won. And fought Techy too, and technically won. No other character has ever been able to do that. In the two fights that Puppet Master has been prior to this, it took the combined might of Kill, Demon Kill, Kessler, and Matt to fight him and beat him the first time. Also, if you count the Emerald Defenders, that too. So it took basically 10 people to take him down. Then the second time it took Commando, Puppet Commando, Lego Commando, Puppet Kill, Puppet Kessler, and Puppet Matt, which is 6 people, 6 to 7 people. It took that to take down the Puppet Master. Whereas this time, it took just Matt to take on these 3 very deadly opponents, and he won. And it shows something that Matt's been wanting to show for a while, that he even briefly talked about with Commando. He was like, hey, I want to prove I'm worth something. I want to prove that I'm brave. And that's why Commando's last words ever to Matt, that he ever says, are, you were always brave, Matt. And in Matt's death, you get to see a lot of things happen, like during and after his death. We've already talked about the fact that Commando tells him, you were always brave, Matt. And it gives Matt this sense of accomplishment, this sense of closure, because someone that he did look up to, someone who he looked up to enough to train him, someone he trusted, loved, and cared for, looked at him and said, you did good. You did good. And that's something that Matt really wanted, and in some cases really needed. He needed just to feel validated. He needed that love, that care. Not to say that the Ultimates didn't give it to him. Not to say that they didn't give it to him. But this particular kind of love. And you just see the happiness on his face. He tells Dr. Nukenville, thank you for always fighting on our side. He tells Ted, hey, whatever happened between us is water under the bridge. I know you were a different person when we first met, and it is what it is. I wish what you didn't happen, but I can't take it back. I love you, and you're family to me, and you will always be family to me. And you see Ted console him and hold him close and whatnot. And then Kessler comes in, and he's like, there's got to be something I can do. And Matt, in that moment, instead of saying something like how he said to everyone else, where he basically, gets happy from them and whatever. Because if you notice something with Matt, when he's dying, he's validating all the other people like how he always wanted to be validated. He tells them how he feels about them. He tells them, thank you. He tells them, you did great, you did good. He basically gives them the treatment he always wanted. He tells Commando, thank you for training me. He tells Dr. Nukenville, thank you for always being on our side. He tells Ted, you are my family and I love you. No matter what happens between us, you will always be my family. And then Kessler, he knows how he feels about his mask. And he looks at Kessler and says, can I please see your face just this one last time? And Matt, obviously with Kessler saying basically yes, Matt, with his last moments of ever being able to see anything, looks at Kessler's face for a fleeting few seconds and says, you know what I saw? And Kessler, being a broken mess, just goes back to what he had said before, way back in the past, in Kill Saga Origins, where he says that the only reason why he never takes off his mask is he doesn't see himself. He only sees his father. And Matt looks at him and says, no, all I see is you. And dies. After giving everyone his love and validation, Matt dies. And I felt like this was the perfect death for the character of Matt. Because not only does he validate all his teammates, he tells them how special they are. Just like how Matt always did, right? Even on his deathbed, instead of him having them worry about him, he's worried about them, tells them how he feels about them, tells them how they're special, tells them how they're great. And even when he goes to the afterlife, he finally gets validated by his entire team. Everyone sits there and claps. They all clap for Matt, showing him that he did a good job and that he did good by everyone. Which, it shows also the ramifications of afterwards, because this is the first time you see Commando fully break. Throughout the crossover, he was slowly getting more and more pissed and more sad with every fleeting death that was happening from the team of the Ultimates. But Commando finally breaks after Matt dies. And that's the first time you ever see Commando fully break down. And he just breaks down crying. You see Carlos break down crying. You see Ted and Nukenville not being able to handle it. You see Blood Rain even getting upset. You see Kessler break down screaming because this was their guy. This was Matt, and they lost. Even though they won and they saved the world, they lost. This also goes into the idea of Techy and basically what his role in all of this was. And basically during this crossover you found out that basically Techy had a husband. And that husband died at the hands of, kids or teenagers or whatever you want to call it, breaking into their house, trying to steal some stuff. And when they tried to steal one of Techy's prize inventions, they killed his husband. And Techy believes, because apparently in the future, basically heroes have replaced doctors, surgeons, police officers, etc. They've replaced them because the mankind basically believes that they're more efficient. Techy believes, however, that if it basically went back to the way that things were prior, where cops were able to have their own jobs and whatnot, that maybe his husband would still be alive, rather than having to rely on the heroes. So he goes back in time to basically try to change it. During this crossover, it's kind of implied that Techy is responsible for the deaths of Kill and Saran, because according to him, from what it sounds like, Kill and Saran were basically still alive in his timeline. It's because of Techy as to why they're both dead now. And so this is a character who's had a lot of, influence over the events of the Kill Saga and the Kessler Saga. This is a character who basically instigated most of the events to happen the way that they did. It's because of him that things went down the way that they did. And it ends up being a bigger thing when he's so determined to do what he's doing because he feels like what he's doing is right and will save so many lives. But Matt starts getting to him. It's like, yeah, how many lives are you willing to sacrifice to save those other lives? Is this really worth it in your grand scheme? Like, Matt starts getting to him, and eventually Techy realizes Matt may have a point. And he starts to slowly question whether or not what he's doing is right, but eventually Matt still has to take him down because Techy won't back down fully. This crossover shows a lot of things. It shows basically the closing end of Kessler with his grief towards Kill, because he basically has to kill that part of himself, to figuratively and literally, for the sake of his team. We see the sacrifice of Matt and basically the validation that he finally deserved for being basically one of the strongest members of the team finally. He stood his ground and saved the world. If it wasn't for Matt, the world might have died. The world might have been destroyed, but Matt saved everyone. He basically got his due finally. And obviously with the cliffhanger of the finale of this crossover, it shows that Techy's reign isn't fully over yet. While Techy may be dead, right? While Techy may be dead, Ultimus, his invention, is still alive. And he has his sights set on the Ultimates to finish them off. So, this will basically be, can the Ultimates take down Ultimus? Can they take him down? Or will they ultimately all end up dead? I guess you guys will have to wait and see. But, yeah, I really like this crossover. I really like showing how capable Matt has become, and that he finally got the death that he deserved. This was definitely one of the harder deaths for me to record. I think Kill and Matt are definitely the hardest ones to do. I know that so far from the people who have seen the death of Matt, they've definitely had a hard time afterwards. They've not been the most emotionally stable, I'll say that. So I think the death of Matt hit a little harder for some people than the Kill death did. But in my opinion, they're both still great deaths, and I think both characters had gone out on good terms. So I hope you guys love what's coming soon, and I hope you guys love this crossover. So with that, guys, it's one wonderful video to close. Kill Zomzone, and I'm out for now. Peace.